Traditional education versus progressive education. What is traditional education? Traditional education focuses primarily on the preservation of knowledge and society as a whole, with teachers transmitting bodies of organised information and skills that are deemed valuable. They conserve their value by passing them on to docile, obedient and receptive students. Schooling in this traditional fashion is designed to be a preparation for life that teaches students to conform and comply with the existing order of things. With the teachers at the forefront of the learning process, traditional education adopts a top-down approach, encouraging the learners to play a passive role in their learning. What is progressive education? Progressive education focuses primarily on reflecting the constant ebb and flow of a student's ever-changing present life, encouraging students to go beyond the preservation of what is good within their society and pushing them to find ways in which they can constantly improve it. With teachers promoting individual freedom, the students are encouraged to be inquisitive, becoming active participants in their own learning. In order to analyse the outcomes of traditional and progressive education, it is important to first establish the aims of education. Nell Noddings contends that some philosophers have started with a description of ideal or actual states from which they have derived recommendations for education. Others have started with a vision for the education of individuals and asked what sort of state might support that vision. Simply accepting the state as it is and the system as it is. Two traditional approaches that Noddings believes to be dangerous strategies. For Noddings, the aims of progressive education are in stark contrast of the traditional aims, which centre around the acceptance of both the state and system currently standing. The primary aim of progressive education, in contrast to traditional, is justice, providing all students with an education that will meet their needs, which in turn will promote freedom of thought and expression within society through allowing students to participate in the construction of their own learning objectives. John Dewey, in his work Traditional versus Progressive Education, identifies three main strategies in which the overall aims of traditional education were to be met. Dewey affirms it is the chief business of the traditional schools to first, transmit bodies of education and skills that have been worked out in the past, second, to develop and instill standards and rules of conduct, and third, to streamline these processes with the general pattern of school organisation. Dewey contends that these three strategies fix the aims and methods of instruction and discipline and effectively create a static society. Dewey then looks to break down the strategies and aims of progressive education. The primary strategy invoked here is to place emphasis on the freedom of the learner, promoting the intellectual and moral development of the young. The overall aim here for Dewey is for the system to encourage students to set new problems which have to be worked out on the basis of a new philosophy of experience, pushing them to continue moving and growing the society around them. In drawing on Tate's method of analysis, discussed in his work Making Sense of Mass Education, where Tate looks to move away from looking at progression in terms of modernist sociologies. Instead, he maps the success of educational practices through a closer analysis of the techniques and practices by which we are shaped as particular types of individual, and by which we have our conduct regulated within mass education settings. Looking critically at both a key traditional practice and a key progressive practice, I hope to draw a comparison between the two and analyse which, by Tate's standards, are shaping a better society. First, let's take a look at a traditional concept, the banking concept. The banking concept, as seen in many mass education systems, is the concept that students are empty vessels in which information should be deposited, as though depositing money into a bank. Paulo Freire explains it is the teacher's task to fill the students with the contents of his narration, contents which are detached from reality, disconnected from the totality that engendered them and could give them significance. affirming that this leads students to memorize mechanically the narrated content, turning them into containers, receptacles to be filled by the teacher. This concept molds individuals and heavily regulates them, making them, by Tate standards, ineffective. Now let's take a look at a progressive concept, the power concept. The power concept, as redefined by Henry Giroux, is a concept focused on the construction of classroom pedagogy through institutional change and the distribution of political and economic resources, fueled primarily by a student voice. With far less restraint, this concept gives autonomy to the individual, but also provides them with the tools to be critical, with which, in a mass education setting, Tate would argue, allows for a greater awareness and respect for the things inhibiting a student from learning, such as their social class or gender. When looking critically at both the traditional and progressive forms of education, it is clear to see that traditional education perpetuates inequality in both our schools and our society as a whole. However, although on the surface it would appear that progressive education promotes a more critically engaged and socially aware society, it is not without fault. As Margaret Vicker notes, unless skillfully managed, this approach can lead to an anything-goes approach, with no clear sequence and little development of the systematic knowledge content. Despite perhaps being more difficult to navigate at times, the reward of adopting the teachings of more cognitive theories, as opposed to behaviouralist theories, invokes a greater balance of power within our education system and society as a whole. With a greater consciousness for the hidden curriculum, progressive education will allow us to transcend what Diane Ray defines as a current system that both mirrors and reproduces the hierarchical class relationships in wider society, pushing for more than just equality, but equity for all.